He was just a boy in a wheelchair, alone, voiceless, and forgotten in a snowy mountain town. But when his only family turned against him and rolled him toward the cliff's edge, the world didn't answer with thunder or angels. It answered with fur, with loyalty, with a dog who refused to let go. Before you see what happened next, ask yourself, where were you when someone cried out in silence? And would you have answered? If you believe no child should ever be abandoned, and no soul is beyond saving, stay with us. This story will stay in your soul. Juniper Ridge, Oregon, late October. The clouds hung thick and unmoving above the tree-covered hills, and the scent of cedar clung to the damp morning air. A whisper of wind rustled through the pine needles that lined the narrow roads, some of which hadn't been paved in decades. The trees leaned inward like sentinels guarding secrets, their branches heavy with moisture, and fog drifted lazily across the asphalt like forgotten breath. The pickup truck grumbled up the winding incline, headlights slicing through the mist. Inside, 10-year-old Evan Whitlock sat motionless in the passenger seat, his legs wrapped in a thick brown wool blanket. He had tousled light brown hair that curled at the nape of his neck and pale skin that hadn't seen much sun in recent months. His eyes were a quiet storm, gray with flecks of green, wide and watchful. The accident that took his parents had left him paralyzed from the waist down, but something deeper had changed in him. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, his words were often short, tentative, as though each one had to climb a steep wall before reaching his lips. Clutched in his lap was a small leather-bound notebook with a stitched pine tree on the cover, his mother's last birthday gift to him, now filled with half-sentences, sketches, and unspoken fears. Driving beside him was Raymond Whitlock, Evan's uncle and now legal guardian. Raymond was a man in his early 50s with a square jaw, tight lips, and thinning dark hair brushed back with clinical precision. He wore a pressed flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans, and a leather wristwatch that he checked compulsively. His appearance was neat, but there was a hollow sharpness in his face, as though he had once known kindness but had wrung it dry from his bones. Raymond's tone was often clipped and mechanical, especially with Evan, as if everything he did was an obligation he couldn't wait to check off. "You're going to like the house," he said without glancing away from the road. "Lots of space. Quiet. Not too many neighbors." His voice carried no warmth. Evan said nothing. In the truck bed behind them, nestled among tied-down luggage and a folded wheelchair, lay a German shepherd named Valor. At 7 years old, Valor had the classic saddle markings, deep black over his back and golden tan across his chest, legs, and snout. A faint scar curved above his right eye, a relic from his days as a trained search and rescue dog. An old injury to his left shoulder gave him a slight limp, but it did nothing to diminish the intensity of his gaze or the strength in his frame. Since the accident, he had been Evan's shadow, never more than a few feet away. He had pulled the boy from twisted metal before help had arrived. Since then, something unspoken had bound them. Valor slept by Evan's bed, followed his wheelchair with the silent precision of a soldier, and growled low in his throat whenever Raymond came too close. As they passed through the edge of Juniper Ridge, the town revealed itself as little more than a loose knot of buildings nestled in a fold of evergreens. A single general store, a weathered diner, a small church, and a modest medical outpost made up the heart of the place. The rest was scattered cabins and dirt paths veined between trees. Their new home sat at the farthest edge of town, near where the road broke into gravel and finally into forest. It was a wooden cabin built in the 1970s, with moss creeping up its base and a porch that sagged slightly to one side. The windows looked out over the thick canopy of pine and the beginnings of a deep ravine that carved the mountainside. Raymond turned off the engine and exhaled hard. "We're here," he said, stepping out before Evan could respond. He unloaded the wheelchair with practiced indifference, propped it up beside the passenger door, then opened it with a grunt. "Come on. Let's get you inside before the rain starts." Evan slowly shifted forward, waiting for his uncle's arms to lift him into the chair. Valor leapt down from the truck bed and trotted immediately to Evan's side, sniffing his legs and nudging his hand with a warm nose. Evan reached out and held the dog's ear gently between his fingers. Inside, the cabin was cold and smelled faintly of burnt wood and mildew. The furniture was sparse, just a sunken armchair, a rickety table, and a fireplace filled with half-burnt logs. Raymond led Evan to the corner of the living room where a foldable cot had been set up. No pictures adorned the walls. No signs of welcome. That night, Evan didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling while Valor lay curled beside his bed, his breathing deep and rhythmic. Outside, a breeze began to stir. Evan could hear the groaning of the trees and the rustle of animals moving through the underbrush. 2 days passed. Raymond was often away during daylight hours, citing errands and paperwork. He returned each night with the smell of cigarettes and cheap diner coffee, his mood swinging unpredictably between silence and agitation. On the third day, a knock came at the door. Melissa Quinn stood on the porch, clipboard in hand. She was in her late 40s, tall and willowy, with chestnut hair streaked in silver tied in a braid over one shoulder. Her face was freckled, her eyes a tired blue. She wore a padded vest over a forest green sweater and jeans tucked into hiking boots. Melissa was a community nurse assigned to check in on rural miners with medical needs. A widow of 10 years, she had spent the last decade walking trails and backroads, bringing medication and companionship to families who had no one else. Her voice was soft, but carried conviction. "Just a routine check-in," she explained as Raymond reluctantly let her in. "We like to get a sense of how the child is adjusting." She knelt beside Evan, introduced herself, and gave Valor a gentle scratch behind the ears. Evan didn't speak, but he did look at her. That was enough for her to sense something. Raymond hovered by the wall, arms crossed. "Everything's fine. He's adjusting." Melissa nodded politely but noticed the lack of toys, books, or even a proper bed. She also noticed how Valor kept himself between Evan and Raymond the entire visit. Back in her car, she made a note, "Follow up in 3 days. Possibly longer-term assessment required." As the evening crept in, Evan sat on the porch wrapped in his blanket while Raymond talked on the phone inside. Valor lay beside him, ears alert. From across the trees, a hawk called once, its echo swallowed in the gathering mist. The air smelled like rain. The wind had picked up. And though Evan couldn't explain it, he suddenly felt that the forest itself was listening. Juniper Ridge, Oregon, 4 days later. The sky had shifted into a low, dim haze that blanketed the evergreens with a kind of restless sleep. The wind was gentler, but it carried the smell of damp earth and wood smoke from scattered chimneys. At the higher ridge, the trees seemed to sway not from the breeze, but from a collective whisper, as if the mountain itself sensed something stirring. Inside the cabin, Evan sat by the window, his blanket wrapped tight around his shoulders. It was the only spot in the house where natural light reached him. Outside, the trees swayed, and the distant call of a raven echoed through the gorge. His sketchbook, his mother's final gift, rested in his lap, open to a half-finished pencil drawing of a dog. Not just any dog, Valor, mid-leap, ears back, eyes burning with purpose. Valor lay curled beside the wood-burning stove, his head on his paws, tail occasionally thumping when Evan stirred. His fur was slightly darker from the rain the previous night, but he kept his post, watching everything. Raymond had left early that morning after a phone call Evan hadn't been able to hear clearly. He hadn't said goodbye. Evan hadn't asked where he was going. At precisely 10:14 a.m., the old pickup truck's engine had growled down the gravel road. By 10:17, Valor was already at the window, ears forward, hackles just barely raised. Evan didn't need to ask. Valor didn't trust Raymond, and neither did he. Later that day, Evan wheeled himself slowly to the front door. He paused, slipped a folded note under a heavy stone by the porch post, and looked toward the path Melissa had taken days earlier. It was a fragile hope, that maybe someone would see it. That evening, Raymond returned, slamming the door harder than usual. His clothes smelled of alcohol and oil, his boots were muddy, and his brow furrowed deeper than Evan had seen before. "You eat yet?" he asked without turning around. His voice was dry, flat. Evan shook his head. Raymond tossed a packet of instant noodles on the table. "Make that last. Not getting groceries till next week." Valor let out a low growl. Raymond's eyes flicked toward the dog and narrowed. "You better keep that mutt in line," he muttered. "He so much as scratches me, he's gone." Evan's fingers tightened around the blanket. That night, the boy didn't sleep. He wrote in the sketchbook, words hidden between doodles, fears, memories, and a sentence that repeated like a prayer, "Don't let him take me there again." In the nearby town of Everglade Bend, Nurse Melissa Quinn sat by her kitchen window with a mug of lukewarm tea. The sun was barely setting, casting copper reflections on the glass. Her house was modest, brick, with white trim, and cluttered with reminders of a life once shared, a guitar her husband had played, books on children's psychology from her time in school nursing. She was dressed in a gray knit sweater, jeans, and wool socks, her dark braid damp from the light drizzle. Melissa had never remarried after losing her husband to a heart attack 8 years earlier. The grief had tempered her kindness, not extinguished it. It made her slower to trust but quicker to act when something felt wrong. She pulled open her patient notes from earlier in the week. Evan Whitlock, age 10, recent paraplegia, legal guardian Raymond Whitlock. Melissa circled the line she had written on instinct, emotional suppression likely, evaluate home safety at next visit. A tap on her front porch startled her. She opened the door and saw nothing but fog and faint footprints in the gravel path. At her feet, something had been wedged beneath her welcome mat, a folded paper, smudged at the edges, damp but still legible. In shaky handwriting, it read, "If he takes me to the edge again, Valor can't stop him twice. Please tell someone." Melissa's hand flew to her chest. She stared out into the descending fog and felt her heart squeeze. She picked up her phone and called Sheriff Darren Cole. Sheriff Cole was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, with sandy hair receding at the temples and a calm voice honed by years of de-escalating angry loggers, panicked tourists, and the occasional mountain lion panic. He was a former student of Melissa's, one who had lost his mother young and always remembered the woman who'd brought him hot cocoa after school. Now, sitting behind the wood-paneled desk in the sheriff's office, he listened without interrupting as Melissa read the letter over the phone. When she finished, there was silence for a long breath. "I knew something about that man was off," Cole said finally. "We can't open a case without a formal report, but I'll go check in." Quietly. Melissa nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Thank you, Darren. Just look into it. Please." Back at the cabin, Raymond stood over the kitchen table, shuffling through papers. A manila envelope lay torn open beside an open laptop. The screen glowed with numbers, account balances, property transfer forms. One window had a life insurance policy. Another displayed a forged signature, barely matching the fluid grace of Rachel Whitlock's handwriting. He looked out the window toward the forest. He hadn't planned to wait much longer. That night, the air turned colder. Evan lay curled under his blanket, Valor pressed tightly to his side. He listened to the fire crackle and the creak of floorboards from the next room. Raymond was pacing. Or packing. Evan couldn't tell. But he knew one thing, the mountain wasn't done speaking. And neither was he. Not yet. Juniper Ridge, Oregon, just before dawn. A thin drizzle fell over the sloped rooftops and thick woods, the kind of mist that clung to clothing and sank into bones. The pines stood tall and still, their branches collecting raindrops that eventually fell in slow, deliberate plinks to the forest floor. The ridge was unusually quiet, the chirping of birds silenced as if even nature sensed something was wrong. Inside the cabin, Evan stirred in his cot. The air was cold, and the fire had long since gone out. Valor was already awake, sitting upright by the front door, tail still, eyes fixed on Raymond, who stood packing a small backpack. The tension in the room was electric. Evan felt it in his chest like a slow-rising tide. Raymond hadn't said a word to him since last night. No breakfast. No reason. Just a sharp glance toward the chair. "Get dressed," Raymond muttered. Evan didn't move. "I said get dressed. We're going out." The boy's voice, hoarse and trembling, barely made it past his lips. "Where?" Raymond zipped the bag hard. "You'll see. Fresh air will do you good." Evan turned his head to Valor. The dog didn't move, but his ears twitched, his eyes never leaving Raymond. Raymond's pickup climbed the gravel road, wheels hissing on the wet stones. Evan sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in his worn blanket, his hands clenching the edge of his sketchbook now hidden under the fabric. Valor sat in the back seat, tense but silent. Every few seconds, he shifted his weight, letting out small huffs of unease. They passed the last marked trailhead of Juniper Ridge and continued onto a lesser-known logging road that curved sharply upward, nearly hidden beneath brush. Evan had heard of this path once before. It wasn't on maps, just something hikers occasionally spoke of at the general store. They called it Dead Pine Lookout. A place with no fencing, no cameras, and no one nearby. The truck stopped suddenly. Raymond stepped out and opened the passenger door. His face was calm, expressionless. "We'll walk from here." He unloaded the wheelchair from the truck bed with one hand, locking the wheels into place and rolling it around to the passenger side. He reached in and lifted Evan from the seat without a word. The boy didn't resist. He couldn't. Valor leapt out of the truck, shaking off rain as he landed, then ran to Evan's side, walking so close his fur brushed against the boy's blanket. The trail was narrow and muddy, bordered on both sides by steep drops hidden beneath undergrowth. Moss grew in thick veins along the rocks. A raven cawed in the distance. Raymond wheeled Evan slowly but purposefully along the path, breathing heavier with the incline. His boots left deep imprints in the mud. "You know," Raymond said at last, "your parents had this idea that you'd grow up and be someone special." Evan's throat tightened. He remained silent. "Turns out," Raymond continued, "sometimes people just waste space. You can't fix everything. Your mom, your dad, they thought they could fix everything." He stopped walking. Up ahead, the trees broke into a clearing. It was a cliff. A jagged precipice overlooking miles of valley forest below. No fence. No markers. Just earth, slick with rain and cracked in places from the slow, patient erosion of time. Raymond stood behind the chair and exhaled. "I thought you'd like to see the view." Valor growled low, stepping between Raymond and the chair. Raymond's lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. "Move, mutt." The dog didn't move. Raymond stepped forward, lifting one foot as if to kick, but Valor let out a vicious snarl, hackles rising, teeth bared. It was the sound of loyalty weaponized. Then, suddenly, the wind changed. And in that sharp cold gust, Evan spoke, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Valor," he whispered. "Stay." The dog held position, frozen and coiled. Raymond didn't wait. He grabbed the wheelchair handles and yanked hard. But as the chair rolled forward, Valor launched. His body slammed into the side of the wheelchair, knocking it away from the edge at the last second. The wheels bounced against a protruding root, and the chair tipped sideways, catching between a boulder and a cluster of thorny branches. Evan screamed as his shoulder hit the armrest, pain shooting through his back. The chair stopped. It didn't fall. Raymond stumbled backward, eyes wide. For a moment, he just stared, at the boy, at the dog, at the empty sky behind them. Then, without a word, he turned and began walking, no, running, down the trail. Valor barked once, but didn't chase him. Instead, he stood over Evan, body trembling, ears pinned back, tongue flicking nervously. He whined softly and began sniffing around the wheels. One was bent. Evan was wedged tightly, too close to the edge to move. Rain started again. Meanwhile, in Everglade Bend, Melissa Quinn paced her living room, phone pressed to her ear. Her face was pale, lips tight. "You need to go now, Darren. I think he's done it. I think he's taken the boy up there." Sheriff Darren Cole had already put his jacket on. "I'm heading out. I'll start at the Dead Pine Trail. I remember that ridge from search and rescue training years ago. If they went anywhere isolated, that's it." He threw his gear in the back of his cruiser and turned on the lights. The tires spat water behind him as he left the station. At the cliff, Evan's breathing slowed. His left arm throbbed. His fingers gripped the cold metal armrest, knuckles white. Valor lay down beside him, curling his body against the boy's side, shielding him from the wind. He licked Evan's hand and rested his head there. Evan opened his eyes to the gray sky, whispering the only thing he could think of. "Please, don't go." Valor didn't move. He never would. Juniper Ridge, Oregon, late afternoon. The sun, if it was anywhere at all, was hidden behind dense clouds rolling low across the mountaintop. Fog coiled between the trunks of the tall evergreens like smoke from a forgotten fire. A damp hush had fallen over the forest, broken only by the occasional gust of wind that bent the thin branches and sent pine needles raining down like whispers. Evan Whitlock was cold. His left side was crammed against a jagged boulder, the wheelchair pinned sideways between the rock and a thorn-covered root. The metal armrest had bitten into his ribs hours ago, and every shallow breath sent dull pain shooting down his back. His fingers had gone numb, curled under the thin blanket that had slipped halfway off during the fall. Beside him, pressed tight to his body, was Valor. The German shepherd lay still except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. His fur was soaked, his tail muddy, but his head rested gently across Evan's knees. Every few moments, he let out a soft whine or shifted to nuzzle closer. His warmth was the only thing keeping the boy from slipping deeper into cold silence. Evan's voice was dry when he whispered, "You still with me?" Valor opened one eye, ears twitching. Then he sat up, shook the water from his back, and stepped carefully toward the edge. He looked down, then back toward the forest above, nose lifted to the wind. Then he howled. It was not a bark or a cry, it was long, low, mournful, and impossibly strong. The sound echoed down the cliffs and across the tree-lined basin like a forgotten hymn. It carried through hollows and over ridges, into silence and mist. Evan closed his eyes. Again, he murmured. Valor howled once more, louder this time. Then again. Far below the ridge, in the sheriff's cruiser tearing through the switchbacks of Juniper Ridge Trail, Sheriff Darren Cole's hand shot to the radio. "Did you hear that?" he said aloud, though the only one in the car with him was his dog-eared map on the passenger seat. He slowed the vehicle and stepped out into the swirling fog. The pine-scented air rushed his face, and he heard it, faint, but clear. A howl. No coyote made a sound like that. No wild dog either. He leaned into the radio. "This is Cole. Melissa, do you copy?" Her voice came back through a haze of static. "Go ahead. I've got auditory confirmation. I'm proceeding on foot toward the Dead Pine Bluff. If I lose signal, send backup in 30. Be careful," Melissa said, her voice tight. He grabbed his field pack and started into the trees. Back at the cliffside, Evan drifted in and out of consciousness. He thought once he saw his mother's face, the way it used to glow under the yellow porch light when she called him in for dinner. He tried to lift his hand, but it barely twitched. His lips cracked when he whispered, "Mom." Valor stepped over him, nuzzling his cheek. "Don't go," Evan murmured. "Please don't go." The shepherd sat firmly beside him, his thick coat rising like a wall between the boy and the wind. But then something changed. Valor stood. Stiffened. His ears twitched. His nose pointed east, toward the trees. He let out a sharp, urgent bark. Then another. Sheriff Cole moved with the focus of a man trained by both law and wilderness. He followed the sound through thick brush and steep inclines, his boots slick with mud. His coat was drenched, and sweat mixed with rain across his brow. But he didn't stop. He paused only once, at the edge of a stream, where he spotted fresh paw prints in the muck. Deep. Heavy. Too large for a fox or raccoon. His pulse quickened. He climbed again. Then he heard it, another bark. 2 short bursts. This time, close. Hang on, he muttered. I'm coming. Down in Everglade Bend, Melissa sat in her car outside the sheriff's office, hands gripping the steering wheel. She had her own reasons for staying near the radio tower: better reception, closer access. In her lap, Valor's note sat folded, crumpled at the corners. She'd lost her only child 10 years ago to a silent illness that no doctor had seen coming. Since then, she had learned to listen for things that didn't have voices. Like the silence between words. Like the way Evan's eyes had followed her when Raymond wasn't looking. Back on the ridge, the wind shifted. Valor barked again, then howled, long and rising like a flare in the night. And then, from the tree line, a voice cut through the fog. Evan. Sheriff Cole emerged, soaked and gasping, his flashlight cutting a trembling beam through the haze. Valor ran to him, then doubled back toward the cliff's edge, barking frantically. Cole's eyes widened as he approached the slope. Sweet Jesus. He dropped to his knees beside the tangled wheelchair, scanning Evan's body. The boy was pale, but alive. Lips blue. Eyes fluttering. You're okay, Evan. I've got you. I'm here now. He pulled the radio from his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Sheriff Cole. I've located the child. He's alive but hypothermic. Immediate medevac needed. Sending coordinates. He looked down at the dog beside him. Good boy, he said softly. Valor licked Evan's hand once, then lay down again, this time on both of them. Waiting. Juniper Ridge, Oregon, twilight had begun to bleed into the fog-drenched sky, and the edges of the clouds turned the color of cold iron. The wind rose again from the basin below, carrying with it a bitter scent of pine sap and wet stone. Down the switchbacks, the trail that led to Dead Pine Bluff was almost invisible now, swallowed by creeping mist and the approach of night. Sheriff Darren Cole crouched beside Evan's tangled wheelchair, his breath puffing out in short bursts, both from the cold and from urgency. He had radioed for emergency response 10 minutes earlier, but in this part of the mountain, 10 minutes felt like eternity. Valor lay draped across Evan's body, unmoving except for the slow rhythm of his breathing. The boy was conscious, barely, but fading fast. Cole reached into his bag, pulling out a thermal blanket, cutting it open with a field knife and draping it over Evan and Valor both. He activated a handheld flare and planted it into the soil nearby. Its red light pulsed like a heartbeat through the fog. You held on, buddy, he whispered. You did good. Evan opened one cracked eye and whispered, Is he gone? Cole nodded. He won't hurt you again. Evan didn't respond, but his fingers moved slightly, finding Valor's ear and curling into the damp fur. Meanwhile, farther down the ridge road, Raymond Whitlock was hunched behind the wheel of his truck, boots dripping with mud, hands trembling over the steering wheel. His flannel shirt was half unbuttoned, revealing a sweat-dampened t-shirt beneath. He hadn't gone far, he didn't know the back roads well enough. Worse, the fog had thickened, obscuring signs and making his tires slide dangerously close to the drop. The headlights illuminated something unexpected up ahead, a figure standing in the road. Melissa Quinn. She was wrapped in a long rainproof coat, hood pulled low, flashlight in hand. Her expression was unreadable. Raymond slammed the brakes and skidded to a halt. The truck fishtailed before settling. He rolled down the window, voice tight and thin. What the hell are you doing out here? Melissa took a step forward. Looking for a boy you lost. You're crazy. From the woods behind her, red and blue lights pulsed. A second later, a sheriff's vehicle pulled in behind Raymond's truck. The door opened, and Deputy Marlon Green stepped out. In his late 30s, Marlon was compact, dark-skinned, with a steady gaze and a quick drawl. He didn't pull his weapon, he didn't have to. He approached Raymond with a casual confidence honed over years of dealing with mountain drunks and men who thought their fear was hidden behind volume. "Evening, Mr. Whitlock," Marlon said. "We've got some questions for you. Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Raymond hesitated. Melissa's flashlight beam didn't waver. "Unless you'd rather we add resisting arrest to your list," Marlon added. Raymond opened the door and stepped out. His boots hit the gravel with a thud. Back on the bluff, the hum of rotor blades split the air as a rescue helicopter appeared above the treetops. Its spotlight cut through the mist and caught the red of the flare. The whine of the winch echoed as two rescue medics rappelled down, one in orange, one in navy. Their movements were practiced, efficient. One of them, Pete Harmon, in his mid-40s, rugged, with a graying beard and calm demeanor, reached Evan and immediately began his assessment. Pete had been a paramedic for 20 years and had seen more than one near miracle in these woods, but few that looked like this: a wheelchair wedged into a rock cleft, a boy half frozen, and a dog refusing to move aside until given permission. He pressed his fingers gently to Evan's neck. "Pulse is weak but steady," he called to his partner. "Hypothermic. We need to move him now." They unbuckled the safety harness carefully, Pete cradling Evan in his arms as the chair shifted. The root it had snagged on snapped under pressure, and the metal frame tumbled down into the void. Evan gasped. Pete held him tighter. "It's gone, kiddo." "But you're not." They strapped Evan and Valor into a dual-lift sling, Valor remaining in the harness beside Evan like he belonged there, which, Pete decided, he absolutely did. As the pair rose into the air, lifted into the belly of the chopper, Sheriff Cole stood below and saluted with 2 fingers. "Good boy," he said, once again, to the silhouette of Valor rising with the boy he had refused to leave. Hours later, the hospital room glowed softly with fluorescent light. 4 tubes and slow beeping monitors framed Evan's narrow bed. His cheeks had color again, lips no longer blue. Valor lay beneath the bed, cleaned and bandaged, tail twitching occasionally in his sleep. Melissa sat by the window, her coat still damp and her hands wrapped around a paper cup of bad coffee. Sheriff Cole entered quietly, holding a USB drive and a folded police report. He handed them to her wordlessly. "I checked the cabin," he said. "Found printed bank transfers. Life insurance policies. Even guardianship forms with his forged signature. We've got enough." Melissa didn't speak. She reached out and touched Evan's hand gently. The boy stirred. Then whispered, "Valor saved me." Cole nodded. "Yeah, kid. He sure did." Everglade Bend Medical Center, 2 days later. Outside, snow had begun to fall for the first time that season, soft as ash and silent as memory. It drifted past the windows of room 214 in lazy spirals, dusting the hills beyond in early winter white. The air inside was warm, humming faintly with monitors and the occasional hush of nurses passing in the hallway. Evan Whitlock lay nestled under a quilt stitched with pine trees and blue stars, donated by the local church. His eyes were open now, clearer than they'd been in days. One arm rested in a sling, and a small bruise bloomed across his cheekbone, but his breathing was steady. A folded drawing sat on his tray, an image he'd made that morning in the hospital's therapy room, himself, Valor, and a red flare glowing beside them under a dark forest sky. Melissa Quinn sat nearby, her shoulders draped in a soft shawl, her brow furrowed not with worry but focus. She had barely left the room since the boy was admitted. Her gray-blue eyes scanned the pages of legal documents spread across her lap, emergency guardianship petitions, affidavits, and a letter from Sheriff Darren Cole. Valor lay curled at Evan's feet, his front paw wrapped in gauze. His coat had been brushed out and shampooed by a veterinary assistant, but the scar above his eye still gave him a wolfish nobility. His tail thumped once when Evan reached down and touched him gently. "Will I have to go back?" Evan asked, his voice quieter than the snowfall. Melissa looked up. "No, sweetheart," she said. "You never will." There was a knock at the door. Sheriff Cole stepped in, scarf still dusted with snow. He was holding a manila envelope under one arm and a solemn expression that broke into relief when he saw Evan sitting up. "Heard you've been drawing again," he said. Evan nodded, a small smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. Cole pulled a chair next to Melissa. "It's official. The DA is filing charges against Raymond Whitlock. Attempted murder, endangerment of a minor, fraud, and forgery. They've got everything. Signed statements, banking records, even the fake guardianship form." Melissa looked at Evan, then at Cole. "When's the hearing?" "Tomorrow morning. The judge has already reviewed your petition for full guardianship. Given the situation, she's moving fast." Evan looked between them, uncertain. "Do I have to go?" Cole smiled gently. "No, son. But you're the reason this happened, the reason we caught him. If you ever want to tell your story, in your own way, people are listening." Evan glanced at his drawing. "Maybe I'll write it." The next day, Judge Mary Ann Holloway presided over the hearing in a wood-paneled courtroom above the sheriff's station. She was in her early 60s, tall and sharply composed, with iron-gray hair pinned in a low chignon and glasses perched low on her nose. Known throughout the district for her firm but compassionate approach, she had no patience for cruelty or neglect, especially involving children. In the gallery sat Sheriff Cole, Melissa, and Deputy Marlon Green. Evan remained at the hospital, but his presence hung in the air like a silent witness. Raymond stood between his public defender and the bailiff. His appearance had changed, his face drawn, eyes hollow. His shirt was wrinkled, collar open. He looked like a man who had finally been seen for what he was and couldn't bear it. The prosecutor, James Pritchard, read the charges aloud: 1 count attempted murder of a minor. 1 count felony child endangerment. 3 counts of fraud. 2 counts of document falsification. Judge Holloway listened without expression. Then came the evidence, Sheriff Cole's field report. Photos of the cliff. Burned financial documents found in the cabin. A vet's report confirming Valor's injuries consistent with protective action. Evan's handwritten note retrieved by Melissa. And finally, the video surveillance from a gas station showing Raymond shopping calmly just hours after Evan went missing. The courtroom was silent. Then the judge spoke. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, and after reviewing the full psychological and legal assessments, the court sentences Raymond Whitlock to 25 years in state prison, without possibility of parole for 15. There was no reaction from Raymond. Judge Holloway continued. Furthermore, guardianship of Evan Whitlock is hereby granted to Ms. Melissa Quinn, pending full adoption review within 6 months. May this child know peace, protection, and belonging from this day forward. Melissa exhaled. It wasn't loud, but it was full, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for weeks. Cole squeezed her shoulder. You did good. That evening, back at the hospital, Evan sat propped up in bed, Valor beside him as always. Snow drifted past the windows, turning the world into a muted painting of white and gray. Nurses had brought in cards from other children, some from his former school, others from out of state. Crayon messages like, Dear Evan and Valor, you are heroes. Don't be scared, we're with you. Valor is the best dog ever. One note came from Florida, covered in glitter and stickers. It read, To Evan and Valor, you're the bravest team. I wish I could hug you. Love, Ava, age 7. Evan's eyes shone as he read it again. Valor licked his arm. Melissa returned from the hallway and sat beside him. "Guess what?" she said. "Tomorrow you're going home." Evan blinked. "You're home?" She smiled. "Our home." He reached for her hand, and she held it tightly. Outside, snow covered the pine boughs and rooftops of Everglade Bend. The night was still, but inside room 214, a small warmth burned that not even winter could touch. Juniper Ridge, Oregon, 3 weeks later. The snow had settled thick and clean across the rooftops and ridgelines, transforming the forest into a world of muted grace. It muffled the usual creaks and scuffles of life, leaving only the occasional birdsong or the hush of wind weaving through pines. From the porch of a small cedar-paneled cottage tucked near the tree line, smoke curled from a brick chimney, rising like a slow-dancing ribbon into the crisp blue sky. Inside, the living room was bathed in soft morning light. Handwoven rugs covered the floor, and shelves lined with children's books and pottery ringed the walls. On the mantel above the stone fireplace stood a framed photo, Evan in his hospital bed, smiling shyly, Valor's head resting beside his hip, and Melissa Quinn standing behind them with eyes that held both pride and relief. Beneath the photo was a small plaque that read, "Survivors build the strongest homes." Evan wheeled himself carefully across the wooden floor, his new custom chair rolling smoothly over the rug seams. He wore a navy sweater, sleeves too long, and a pair of corduroy pants with a crayon tucked into one pocket. His cheeks had color again, and though his legs remained motionless, the rest of him was alive in ways he hadn't felt in months. His room, his very own, had been designed with the help of a local carpentry group. It faced east so he could wake with the sun. A desk with adjustable height sat beneath the window. There were sketches taped to the wall, drawings of Valor, of mountains, of a red flare blooming like a signal fire over the woods. Next to his bed was a padded crate lined with fleece blankets and a small blue pillow, Valor's space. Melissa stood in the kitchen, tall and poised in her simple wool dress and warm brown cardigan, her hair loosely pinned and curls escaping to frame her cheeks. She stirred oatmeal on the stove, humming an old tune her mother used to sing in winter. Since bringing Evan home, her movements had softened, but her resolve had only grown stronger. "Hungry this morning?" she asked. Evan grinned. "Starving." Valor padded in from the hallway and sat beside Evan's chair, tail brushing lightly against the boy's side. He now wore a navy blue vest embroidered with a simple white patch, "Therapy Dog, Emotional Support." His ears perked as he glanced between Evan and Melissa. The three of them ate breakfast together in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the quiet finally meant peace. That afternoon, there was a gentle knock at the front door. Melissa opened it to find a woman with striking dark hair streaked with silver, wearing a woven shawl and carrying a basket filled with hand-knit scarves and second-hand books. She was tall and lean, her posture upright with the grace of a dancer, and her voice low and musical. "Sarah Whitmore," she introduced. "I used to teach at the public school before I lost my son. I heard about what you're building here. A home for kids who need healing." Melissa stepped aside and welcomed her in. "We're just starting. You're our first visitor." Sarah stepped into the warmth, glancing around. Her gaze landed on Evan's drawings, and her eyes softened. "I'd like to help," she said. "If you'll have me." In the weeks that followed, the house began to shift, not in its structure, but in its soul. Children started visiting, some just for the day, others staying for weekends. Each had their own story, and each was greeted at the door by Valor, tail wagging low and calm, his presence like an anchor. Melissa began organizing art sessions and story circles. Sheriff Cole dropped by often, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just to sit on the porch and listen to the wind with a cup of strong coffee in hand. Evan began writing a book. It started as sketches, then became pages. He titled it "The Drop That Never Fell." The story of a boy in a wheelchair, a mountain, and the dog who stayed. In the final pages, Evan wrote. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes or ride in flashing cars. Sometimes they wear fur and never leave your side, even when the world disappears beneath you. He included a drawing, a boy in a wheelchair and a German shepherd beneath tall pine trees. Above them, stars. On a late Sunday evening, Evan wheeled himself onto the porch. The last light of day spilled gold across the snow-covered trail. He looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "We made it, Mom. We're okay." Valor nudged the boy's elbow, then laid down at his feet. Inside, Melissa placed a hand over her heart and stared out the window at the two of them, boy and dog, silhouetted against the snowy glow. A family not made by blood, but by survival, trust, and something deeper than fate. She smiled. Sometimes, the angels we wait for come on 4 legs, not wings. Sometimes, healing begins not with loud rescue, but with a silent paw placed over a shaking hand. Evan's story is not just about survival, it's about being seen, being believed, and being loved without condition. If you've ever felt abandoned, know this, your story is not over. And if you believe, like we do, that no child should ever be pushed to the edge of silence, then comment below, Amen. May God bless the protectors, the survivors, and the faithful ones who never leave our side. Subscribe for more stories of hope, healing, and the furred heroes who remind us what love really means.